the original First Blood, if you'd never heard of it and you showed it to somebody and then you went, and they made a children's cartoon out of this, you'd be like, what are you talking about?
1980s now.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of 1980s Now, a weekly examination of the importance of 1980s pop culture and its continued influence today. Hey, my name is Will, and joining me today are not my usual knucklehead co-host, but instead, I've got a serious person here, a true expert. He's the check this out. He's an Emmy-winning filmmaker, a best-selling author. He's a professor of film. More legitimate than any of the credentials we have among the three of us on this usual show. And somehow he also finds time to host his own podcast, The Long Rewind. Please welcome to the show, Dustin Morrow. Hey, Dustin.
Hey, Will. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I listen to your show all the time, and I'm happy to be here chatting with you today.
Okay, so you're the one that listens. That's great.
It's me.
Yeah.
If you're seeing one little drop on the map in Portland, Oregon, that's me.
That is it. You know, I don't know how it is with your show, and I want to ask you about what it is. But I don't know if any family members even listen, you know, like I find it hard to get family and friends to listen to the podcast. You should, when you have an artistic venture, they often suggest start with a low hanging fruit to get, stuff going. When it comes to podcasts, they're like, yeah, I'll check it out. And they don't. I guess I'm lucky to have strangers listen, but do you have more success with family and friends?
I think my sister listens sometimes. I know my parents don't, despite claiming otherwise, they don't really listen.
Yeah.
Which is weird because they're the ones that kind of got me into film as a kid. Okay. So you would think they would be into it. I mean, they took me to all these movies when I was young, and yet now that I'm older, I can't interest them in learning more about those movies. So 'tis what it is.
Yeah. Oh, the cruel irony. So what is The Long Rewind? That's your podcast, of course, and folks can check it out on any podcast platform, including the one they're listening to us on right now.
Yeah.
What's it all about?
It's a show I do with my wife. She's a librarian and a researcher and a writer, and it's a deep dive into the cinema of the 1980s. I was listening to a bunch of 1980s movie podcasts myself as somebody who has an actual scholarly interest in 1980s cinema. I teach courses in it. And I wasn't finding the show that I wanted to listen to. And so I sort of, after talking this over with my wife, we decided to try to create that show. And that show is a show that doesn't take the usual model of like picking a movie every week and just talking about that movie. We sort of try to look under the hood, look a little deeper. We look at trends, motifs, advancements in technology and culture, and how they were reflected in the 1980s. We look at why these movies were being made, why they were popular, and we seek to sort of contextualize them within the history of that decade, what was going on. And so, we'll do episodes like, we'll do fun stuff like what was going on with James Bond in the 80s. I mean, people forget there were like 5 James Bond movies in the 80s, which is made it the most prolific James Bond decade, I think.
And some of them were good.
And a few of them were actually pretty good. Yeah. I'm a Roger Moore man myself.
Yeah, me too.
And but we'll also look at like things like the birth of the multiplex and what was going on with the ratings board, and what was the Academy doing during that time. And, the evolution of the blockbuster, the emergence of video store culture and what that meant to Hollywood and to film viewership. And so, we try to keep it light and keep it fun, but our behind the scenes motto is that we also try to be like 15-20% more scholarly than your average movie podcast. So hopefully people will come away learning about a bunch of movies that they weren't aware of, or rediscovering films that they used to be in love with and had forgotten about, but also learning something about that decade and its cinema.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect description. That's what that's my experience. You and Lisa have a great rapport. Thankfully, Thank right? You. I mean, you could, as husband and wife, you could have got on the microphone and be like, "This is not going to work. How do I tell her? How do I tell her I want to hire someone else?"
Yeah, it's it could have gone bad. It could not work. But we were having these discussions over dinner, and we thought they were fun. So we thought, I don't know. It's a little presumptuous to think that people might want to listen to you talk to your spouse, but hopefully,
Yeah.
but hopefully it's educational and entertaining.
It is. I every time I listen, I learn something. And I certainly don't claim to be an expert by any means, but I do like how, obviously in our show, we just often discuss stuff in the 1980s, and some of the topics we talk about take us further in the past, or, talk about stuff that maybe, something today may impact us in the future. But you go into such these deep dives, and they're always fascinating about, and they often, and of course they always lead to, land us back in with these films that we love from that decade. So it's awesome.
Yeah. One thing I love about your show, if I could be complimentary for a moment, is how you're sort of the only other show I can think of that seeks to really reflect on what was going on in the 80s influences us now and what's happening. I mean, it's right there in the name of your show. But yeah, that's something we seek to do as well. Like, what are the long lasting ramifications of what happened in 80s culture? And, what does it still mean to us? And, as the forgotten generation, how can we keep this stuff alive and keep our generation relevant? Yeah,
I just thought of a whole other topic we have to talk about some other time, with regard to go to the 1980s.
Cool.
We're just, I've only touched upon this on different episodes, but I tend to only semi tongue in cheek tell folks, and I believe this, that in that 10 years that we, what's a decade? That's just, just like we're going to talk about genres today. It's this sort of external, this meta thing that we sort of impose, often after the, time. And anyway, it's not a conceit. What's the word? I got to tell you right now, being middle-aged, and let's face it, we're not middle-aged, because that would mean I'd live to be 100.
That's right. We're a little past that.
Yeah, words elude me, but it's an artifice. It's something we created. It's man-made. This concept of a decade, and but I want to say that at least within those 10 years we talk about the 1980s, that we had, I want to say, more than the medieval Renaissance, maybe long-lasting implications, effects across so many different things, from art to science and politics. In film, there seemed to be, in my mind, again, this is our future episode, so many tropes, I want to say, for a word that I think quickly encapsulates this idea, from film and 80s that were born out of the 1980s or refined in the 80s, that still today are, folks are returning to make movies.
Yeah. I mean, I would say most of them, because we were the era of the blockbuster, and that changed Hollywood, profoundly. And it still it's still using the same model that was essentially created in that decade, which means we're still getting the same kinds of movies. If anything, we're getting, just rewarmed 80s properties, when we're rebooting stuff like The Fall Guy. And don't get me wrong, I enjoyed The Fall Guy as a kid. But when that property is getting like a $200 million film treatment with a major movie star, then we're scraping, I mean, what's left? I don't know. Like, are we getting a $400 million Airwolf next year? I don't know. I say that as a joke, but it's probably not that far off.
Probably not. And actually, that's why I wanted you to be here. Because thinking about those things, and how we love the 1980s. We love what was born out of the 1980s. But yeah, maybe enough is enough even for us, in the sense that, we had such, such a creative sort of energy and throughout that decade that, things are getting stagnant, where folks are being a little more safe and just returning to these tropes in a way that, like you're saying, you're just rewarming over. And speaking of what's left, well, I'm sure, and this is in part what inspired my wanting to chat with you today, is we're getting a T.J. Hooker movie.
Are we really? I haven't heard that. Yes, holy cow.
We are. So there you go. That's one of the ones that's left.
Again, this proves my point. Like, we're running out of IP if we're doing stuff like the T.J. Hooker movie. I mean, what is that in name only? What does that mean to the public? I don't know. Anybody
beyond Gen X, anybody younger, it means nothing.
Yeah.
But the thing that caught my attention was not only they bringing this, like you're saying, sort of a more obscure IP from the 1980s, is that they're switching it from the genre of a police procedural, I'll say, as it was in the early 1980s, to a comedy.
Oh. They're giving it the like Charlie's Angels chips treatment.
Yes.
They're gonna mock it at the same time that they reboot it.
Yeah,
I see.
I joked on the show the way
That's
maybe
the thing
they
do.
maybe they could save it is to actually cast Shatner as T.J. Hooker and just have him still doing the job. He's been doing it for the last 40 years, and he's still, in his late 80s or whatever he is, still doing it. He's still a cop in uniform, hood slide right into the back of an ambulance.
Yeah. Well, this is the deeper problem, right? Which is we know the real answer to why reboot this stuff is always going to be financial because Hollywood is a business. But the creative question as to why to reboot this stuff, you have to think about how do I change it versus, how do I remain loyal to its original intent and style and make it seem like there was a reason for making it beyond just making money. And so I understand the inclination to maybe swap the genre on a property like that. But the problem is if the property doesn't have a wide ranging appeal, if it only appeals to Gen Xers, then why are we going to go see it? Are we going to go see it because we want to see it get mocked? Or are we going to go see it because we loved it and we want to see it again? In which case spoofing it is not going to appeal to a particularly big audience.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I agree entirely.
It's a weird challenge. I don't envy them trying to figure that out. Yeah,
and curiously, what I wanted to chat with you today was about sort of these contemporary examples we have of genre switching, and then I have some films from the 1980s that did it with some success, and some others that did it with less success. That I wanted to touch upon. It's interesting to me that you bring up the Fall Guy. Talking about what's left, I have just a brief list here of other films that we've had in the last decade or maybe closer to 2 decades or more that we're bringing TV shows from our youth to the big screen, and it's mixed results. And they were always shifting from something that's a little bit more serious in tone to something that's more comedic. Starsky and Hutch. This is no particular order. Moderately successful. The Brady Bunch probably made some money. Dragnet, likewise, from 1987. Not a big box office or earner. 21 Jump Street was a clear hit, making at least $200 million and having a sequel. The Fall Guy, it made almost $200 million, but unfortunately it cost nearly that much to make it. Yeah,
it lost money for sure.
Yeah, that's probably a failure. Land of the Lost, that was an absolute flop. The Charlie's Angels from 2000 was actually a big hit. Dark Shadows, one that's actually from our parents' youths, more like, again, was cost too much to really make money. And then Chips, we saw in 2017, underwhelming success, only made $26 million. So we're talking about folks revisiting IP, to try to, I don't know why they... And especially today, where we know that folks aren't really making comedies anymore. Naked Gun was a sort of standout, and again, something from our youths. Yeah, I don't know why they think the move from something, again, more serious in tone to lighter is the financial, plan they want to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's just about, it's remixing, right? I mean, this is a cool thing to talk about in the context of like this show and this discussion, because this comes out of postmodernism, which really came to the forefront in the 80s. I mean, that was the era of like postmodern cinema, and this idea of remixing intellectual property, changing it, but not changing it so that you don't recognize it, was something that was really born in the 80s, and we're still doing it today. But now we're doing it with 80s properties. So it's all folding in on itself in a way that is a little head spinning if you think too long about it.
Having conjuring images of an Ouroboros, sort of devouring itself as it. Now that said, and these again mixed bag as far as success. I would like to see, at least I think I'd like to see some of the properties from our youth that they were getting sequels for, maybe do some genre tweaking. I was really excited about, and this is not a film from our youth, but when Megan, the horror film that made almost $200 million the first time around, switched genres. I had no interest in the horror film, where this AI doll was killing off people. But when I saw that trailer where they thought, hey, let's change this. Let's visit a different genre. Let's make it an action movie. Let's make Megan the hero instead of the villain. I now want to go see both. I haven't seen them, either of them. Go see both Megan movies. And that got me excited. Unfortunately, fans of the horror film did not think likewise, because the second film only made $40 million, so just a fraction of the first one. But I think there's an opportunity for folks like Beetlejuice came to mind. You know, we've already seen two similar kind of films, Beetlejuice and Beetlejuice. We know a third's coming. We have a different relationship between Lydia and Beetlejuice. We have this 90s cartoon where they were kind of best friends going on adventures in the underworld together. You know, maybe we have a buddy cop sort of thing where they're solving some supernatural crime or something where it requires them to be under in the, whatever, I can't remember what they call it, the netherworld and in our the waking world, our living world. I think something like that, maybe more, again, maybe that's just a matter of audiences not getting exactly what they want every time. Maybe that's what we're really.
Yeah. I think you're getting at an interesting thing, which is not to get like dry about it, but in scholarly circles, we talk about genre theory, and we talk about the functions of genre and how those are different to filmmakers, to financiers or studios, if you will, and to audiences, right? So for filmmakers, a genre is a way to tell a story. It's, a genre is a preset group of rules or themes or motifs or stylistic things that they can play with. It's like a sandbox that they can play in. And to a financier, to a studio, it's a way to market, right? They use genre, like you can market a horror movie just by telling the horror audience, who are not very discerning, that it's a horror movie, and they'll go because you've explained what the genre is. And this is where Megan ran into trouble, right? And then for audiences, it's like a contract with the maker and seller of the movie, where you're basically telling us, this is what you're going to get when you come to this movie. And so if you break that contract, like Blumhouse did with Megan 2.0, I think that's what it was called.
Right.
Then the audience feels, jilted. And so, it makes less money. That is to say, if you promise me a horror movie and I go and I get an action movie, even if it's a good action movie, I might be pretty upset by that because you've violated like the contract that's created by the genre of the movie.
It's interesting. I wonder if there's some kind of, again, this isn't, you're the scholar, but I'm going to just, say layman stuff. There's a formula almost that we can imagine that accounts for the fact that there's some examples in the 1980s where there was that switch from horror to action with great success. And we could talk about those right now. That maybe is different than Megan, which these films kind of came out right on top of each other. I wonder if the distance, maybe allowing some time between for cultures to even shift and tastes to shift, or something that softens that sort of, they feel less like there was a bait and switch of sorts.
Well, it's the difference between genre switching and genre mashing or genre blending, right? Combining genres can definitely like expand your audience. And again, since we're Gen Xers and we both do Gen X shows, this is where we can get back to the 80s, where this really expanded. Like, not that they weren't doing it in the 70s, but in the 80s, genre mashing really blew up, and we saw, dozens of movies that crossed multiple genres. And again, that's because it was the blockbuster era and they were seeking to maximize the audience. It was also an era where they saw more box office return from international markets, and genre mashing plays really well in international markets, especially if they're the right genres. And so, it made sense that there was this sort of like big business-wide cultural move toward doing that in that era.
It's interesting. You have me thinking of, this phrase, I guess the sort of, the sort of golden egg that folks, studios seek is that 4-quadrant film, right? Where they can bring in audiences from these family and, kids. But I guess genres, there's an overlap there where obviously if it's lighter, then we get the kids. But if it's hard, I mean, obviously there's some limitations to that, Venn diagram where you can't have kids seeing, Friday the 13th necessarily. Although we did, because we grew up in that era. Yeah. But that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, the downside of what you're talking about too is how it limits what gets distributed in theaters, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like we live in a postmodern world where everything is fractured and audiences are fractured. And as a fan of anything, you can find that media pretty easily because there's probably a streaming service that focuses just on it. I mean, there are streaming services that are centered on specific genres, right? Like there's a Shudder for horror would be like the big famous one, but there are others. There are like romance with Hallmark, like there's a million of them. And so, you know, it's not hard to find your little tiny piece of the market that you're interested in. But the problem is that for theatrical distribution, it needs to appeal to all of those markets at the same time. Yeah. And so we get these movies that that cost $200 million and they're just not very interesting because by committee, they've had all the personality ground out of them. And that grounding process comes out of the fear of losing one of those like 8 or 10 potential audiences.
Right.
You know, those superhero movies need to bring in the horror audience. They need to bring in the comedy audience. They need to bring in the audience looking for a love story. I mean, they have to find everybody in order to be profitable. And so what is that movie at the end of the day? I don't know.
Wow. Yeah, that's real. You know what? You of course. I mean, some of the films that I'm can't think of an example at the moment, but you're right. One that has a clearer sort of knows what it wants to be, and is more definitively one landing in one place or another. Usually, everything follows the story, the actors, the characters, the writing is sharper, is more concise, is more enjoyable to see. Versus, you're right, these ones that get a little muddy, which are fine and they're fun, but they're not as impactful as something that knows what it is and is not worried about that. Working on money.
And it's cyclical too. Like you brought up comedies earlier, and comedies are currently considered to be high risk properties. And so most of them go straight to streaming, but they're proven to be very successful on streaming. And so like Happy Gilmore 2, I think is like the big, one of the biggest movies Netflix has ever run. So why did it go straight to Netflix then would be the question. Had it gone into theaters, would it have found similar success? Hollywood doesn't think so right now. You know, did you see the trailer for that Naked Gun movie where Liam Neeson, he's speaking directly to the camera and he's like, yes, we're releasing a comedy in theaters and we need you to come. And like, it was a very strange, very self-aware plea to get audiences to come back to theaters to support comedies. So, you know, these things go into cycles. I keep hoping that the superhero cycle is ending. It doesn't seem like it is, but it seems like it's waning, which is a good thing. But you know, we had the slasher cycle back in our day to return to the 80s. There was the teen sex comedy, you know, that was an era. That was a decade where things turned toward youth culture, you know, in terms of the market. And so we had cycles like that come and go, and we'll see. Maybe some other genre will rise, but right now it seems like 90% of the movies in theaters are superhero movies, or they're low budget, what they call elevated horror movies, right? Which are horror movies that deal with deeper themes like trauma or what have you.
I do like an elevated horror movie. Although you say trauma, I think about like Midsommar or something like that.
Yeah.
No, I'm out. I got enough trauma in my life. We're Gen Xers.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like most of them it's either trauma or it's some kind of sociopolitical issue, right? Like the Purge movies.
Yeah. Right.
Or even Megan, it was sort of about AI. It was just a little early. But yeah, I mean, it's most of this, it's to the point where if a scary movie comes out, that is nothing more than a scary movie, I'm kind of like, I feel it's kind of refreshing. Like I don't need to be
scared.
Yeah. I don't need to be preached to by every horror movie that comes out. Not every horror movie needs to be about trauma or politics or, you know, what have you, but it seems like they are nowadays.
Hey, let's get talk about some examples from the 1980s. And one way or another, these are tied to the 80s. And I hadn't thought about a particular order, but maybe I'll try to go chronologically. There's got a handful here. I'm sure you could think of another handful or so. But these are sort of the biggest ones, I think. Alien to Aliens. So we get 1979, we get to Ridley Scott's Alien, which is, it's science fiction, certainly, but it's a horror film. It's a monster in a house type genre, I guess, subgenre. It's I don't want to say slasher, but it's sort of like that.
It's almost a slasher movie, yeah, because they get picked off one by one, right? And
it's obviously, I guess to sort of reuse a phrase we're just using, it's elevated in a sense that Ridley Scott cleverly, starts making comments on AI, just like we're talking about Megan, even way back then. And this, raises some questions about humanity versus AI and corporations versus, working force, that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's what I think that movie's about, and the sequel, the first sequel. I think they're really about the relationship between the worker and the corporation. Right. And it's there in the opening scenes of Alien where they're sitting around the breakfast table and they're moaning about like overtime and extension of contracts and things like that. And it's like, oh, these are blue collar workers, right? They're just being mistreated by a corporation, just like happens every day in my life. Or, they're very relatable characters. And then in the second one, you get the Burke character, right? The Paul Reiser character, who's there to very sneakily make sure that alien comes back to Earth so that it can be studied. And he's willing to do that at the expense of, the crew. So
I read space truckers, they were referred to as space truckers.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the ripoffs.
Yeah.
Did you ever see Space Truckers?
No,
there was a movie called Space Truckers.
Right.
Yeah. There were a million alien ripoffs.
Yeah.
And that was one of them.
I forgot about that movie. I don't know that I've ever seen it, but I remember the name of it.
Yeah. It starred the little kid from Over the Top, Sylvester Stallone's son that rides in the semi truck with him to the arm wrestling tournament.
Like the only other movie he's in, I would guess.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
But of course, just a few years later. Now, this is what I was thinking about maybe with the Megan thing, because it's actually 7 years later, at least by the time it's released, we get Aliens, the cleverly titled a sequel to the first film. And if I recall, and I'm sure you can correct me, that Ridley Scott wasn't interested in doing a sequel, but James Cameron had a pitch, and it appealed to Scott, and it was to, obviously it's the film that we got ultimately. But it moves away from horror in the sense, at least that we just talked about Alien, and becomes more of a action movie or sci-fi action. I was surprised if these numbers are to be believed. The first movie made $78 million in '79, and the second movie, according to this, unless I'm missing a number, $85 million, which I got to imagine that can't be worldwide. I imagine that movie was much, much bigger than that, but certainly was more successful. And and it much like its predecessor, it was responsible, I think, for some of the tropes that we got further into the 80s with other science fiction films as well.
It's been oft ripped off, yeah, for sure. It was a glorious era, the 80s, for science fiction and fantasy movies. I mean, I think it was the best decade for fantasy films, period, even though there were obviously some great ones before, but I don't think it's ever been rivaled. And yeah, it was part of that string of like hits that included like Predator and RoboCop and some of John Carpenter's work that just so expertly blended science fiction with sort of what you might traditionally think of it as an action movie.
Right.
And also some social commentary. Like RoboCop is full of it. RoboCop is almost more of a satire than it is an action movie. Even it's so upfront and in your face.
Yeah.
But it's there in like Predator too, for sure.
I'd buy that for $1.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Hey, I know it sounds like we've got some giant corporate sponsor behind us, but we don't. Instead, our show is brought to you every week by listeners just like you. And by brought to you by them, I mean they help pay for the bills, and there's a bunch of them, to bring you a quality podcast about 80s nostalgia and its continued impact today. Hey, to join this group of fantastic folks, please go to patreon.com/1980snow. And if you can't do that, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and the podcast platform you're listening to right now. So what, I guess so far, and again, we got a few of these, but I think we could do it as we go here. it's more successful. It's regarded, many people regard it as superior to the original film, although I think within their sort of genres, they're both fantastic movies. But this is an example of tweaking. Maybe it's just a tweak. Maybe that's why. Or maybe there's enough connective tissue to the story prior. We see an arc for Ripley's character that's satisfying. Why are these two not regarded as, or not a lesson to avoid genre switching or tweaking?
That's sort of what I was saying. Like, I feel like it's part of the problem is we grew up with genre mashing, right? Like, who are making movies today? I mean, there are still boomers making movies, but it's mostly Gen Xers and millennials. That's who the filmmakers are in Hollywood right now. And that's a cohort of movie makers who were also moviegoers who consumed the same stuff that you and I did, the movies we've been talking about. These are the movies they grew up on. And so that's their influence. Like, their influences are things like Aliens and Predator and RoboCop. And so they don't even think of it as like genre blending, genre mashing has become so common that people don't even think of it as being particularly novel anymore. But it's hard to forget that, or I should say, hard to remember that this was kind of a novel thing back in the day. Like, if you had taken like Unforgiven and shown it to someone in the 50s, they would have been like, what the hell is this? Like, they would barely have recognized it as a Western, right? It's genres were much more rigid pre-1980s.
The good guys wear white, the bad guys wear black, kind of thing.
Yeah, there was just less coloring outside the lines.
Right, yeah.
But, MTV came along and we saw genre mashing in other artistic disciplines, right? Like, in music, we got hip hop and rock started to combine in ways that were interesting. You remember that Walk This Way, Run DMC, Aerosmith,
of course,
song? Like, new wave bands were like my favorite band, The Police. Like, they were almost a reggae band, and they came out of punk. Like, they started as a punk band, and they brought those influences into their music. But you saw it in TV too. Like, Alf, right, was a science fiction comedy. The A-Team was like kind of a campy humor military thing. Moonlighting had like some film noir, but also a lot of romantic comedy. Miami Vice was cops plus MTV, basically.
Right.
And it was there in literature, like, Neuromancer, like, created the cyberpunk genre, like the William Gibson book, and Stephen King was doing all kinds of genre mashing in his books. It was just everywhere. And so because we grew up with it, it just became part of as artists, our generation's language of making movies. And so it's almost rare nowadays to see a movie that does kind of stick in one genre. Like, it just doesn't happen that often. But, there was a time where it was, genre mashing was the exception and not the rule, really. But it seems to have flipped.
I realize I'm not going in chronological order, but maybe this one is closer to the Megan example, that sort of, the warning of doing this sort of thing. Because this is maybe the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So in 1974, we get Tobe Hooper's seminal film, true straight up slasher horror movie. Makes $30 million at the box office. Hooper sees it as having comedic elements. It's, and so when time to do a sequel, over a decade later, this goes against my argument that maybe time allows for some, forgiveness. But in 1986, we get Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and Hooper leans hard into the comedy, and it's a flop. $8 million at the box office. His fans were not prepared, and maybe in the way that the Megan fans were not prepared.
Yeah, and at the time, people hated it, although it now has a cult following, like a lot of movies. But yeah, people were like, "What the hell is this?" And it's that thing I was talking about, that the use of genre to create a contract between the filmmakers and the studios and the audience. It's especially the way they sold it, right? They sold it as a straight horror movie. So if you see that trailer and that property and you're a fan of the original and you go see that movie and you get a bunch of kind of Looney Tunes comedy, which is what it is. It's very like, I've only seen it once, but my memory of it is that it was very cartoonish, and very broad. Like, and so, if that's what you got and you were expecting something else from your knowledge of what the horror genre usually provides you, then I can see why you would be pretty upset.
So it does seem, yeah, you're right. And even before we've gone through all these examples, I think maybe the biggest lesson that I'm extrapolating from what you're saying is about managing audiences' expectations. Because here's a counter example where you can do this kind of switching or maybe tweaking with success. The Evil Dead franchise. In 1982, we get the first film, which only makes $2.8 million at the time. And then Evil Dead 2 comes out in 1987. It's kind of a redux. It's kind of its own. It's kind of
almost
sequel.
A remake, right?
Yeah, it's like a remake and a sequel. Makes $6 million. But this time around, Sam Raimi, who made the films, leans more into the comedy. And Bruce Campbell in interviews talks about how they were both big fans of the Three Stooges, for example. And by the time the 1990s roll around, they have a third film come out, Army of Darkness, which is even further into comedy and does even better at the box office. So the fans hang in there. But I don't recall how these were marketed, but somehow the fans maybe knew what to expect and stuck with it.
Yeah. I mean, it helps that they're just great movies. I mean, the Evil Dead 2, I think most people consider to be better than the first one. So it helps that, if it had been a worse movie, it might be a different discussion, but yeah, I mean, that's a great example. And then he does it even more, right, with Army of Darkness, right, which goes even further into the comedic, sort of lean of that franchise, if my memory serves.
Yeah. I mean, there's a scene where it is literally Three Stooges poking in eyes and doing
that's right.
And, it occurs to me they added in another genre because it's a fantasy element to it because he time travels to a sort of a medieval era, where he's dealing with knights while he's fighting the Deadites.
I should say, I mean, most of what I've been saying is sort of from the perspective of, why do these movies get made and why were they popular? And, from the studio's point of view, which is always about finding an audience. But as movie lovers, as somebody who loves film, none of those reasons are applicable to why I adore genre mashing. I just find the creative subversion of genre to be really fun to watch. It's like a good filmmaker like Sam Raimi who says, oh, you think this is going to be a horror movie? Well, watch what happens if I bring this whole other genre into this. And it doesn't ruin the horror. It's still scary, but I've given you something else. And in the process of giving you something else, I've expanded sort of the empathy that you might feel for these characters, right? I make movies too, and I make genre movies. And one thing that I always think about when I'm writing a genre movie is that if I introduce humor into the script in such a way that where the audience is laughing along with the characters, like there's no quicker way to bond with someone than to share a joke or to laugh at the same thing to find that you have a shared sense of humor. And so if you're watching, for example, let's say you're watching a horror movie and in the first 20 minutes, the character you're meant to identify with says something funny and laughs at it and you laugh with them, then all of a sudden, like that person's your friend. Like it's a shortcut way to find, to establish some empathy between your audience and your characters. And then what happens when the movie turns into a horror movie is that you care about those characters. Right? Like The Exorcist, the first act of The Exorcist is, I mean, it's not a comedy, but it's a domestic drama. And you really like Ellen Burstyn and you like little Reagan. And so when Reagan becomes possessed, it's hard to watch. I mean, Rosemary's Baby, I mean, these are both 70s properties, not 80s movies, but it's the same thing. You like Rosemary before horrible things start to happen to her. And I think what a lot of Hollywood movies forget is that you have to establish a link, a bond between your audience and your characters. Yeah. But that's one way to use genre mashing. And it's also fun when Hollywood just exhibits some level of self-reflection, which is there in genre mashing too, right? It's a winking at the audience. It's like they're saying like we we get that this is all a little ridiculous and we're all just having fun here. So, like Back to the Future is very much that. It's a pretty straight teen comedy that's meshed with like a 1950s teen drama. And it doesn't take the 1950s. It knows that the 1950s teen drama aspect of it is totally ridiculous. And so it just has fun with it, right? Who Framed Roger Rabbit's another example of that, right? It takes film noir and all the tropes of film noir, like the detective and the femme fatale. And it just says, we're going to make this really goofy by making some of these characters animated, right? The femme fatale in that movie is a cartoon, right? Jessica Rabbit. I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way. It's ridiculous. But it's so much fun because it's Hollywood's, the filmmaker's way of saying, like, we know that all of these tropes. Yeah. We know that you get it. And here's how we're going to like play with it. And that's really fun to watch for a film fan.
You remind me of the success of the Scream franchise when it was Kevin Williams?
Totally. Yeah.
Really went meta on that. And some of thinking about those movies were never terribly scary to me, but obviously they are a callback to slasher films from the 1980s. But more recently, it's not that recent, but Get Out, I'm reminded about how terrifying that was just tonally. And his the main character's best friend is us, making these comments that
exactly
you're just laughing along, and it's that relief that you need, that you're right, helps you bond with the characters. Yeah, I'm wondering, just within the last couple of weeks, I watched the film Sinners, and you're talking about it. Occurs to me, based on what you're talking about, you want to create these opportunities for the audience to bond with the characters. The first hour, it's not a horror movie; it's a period movie that talks about race and culture in the South. Was like during Prohibition, I believe it is, right?
Yeah.
And if the movie had continued in that direction, I would have been fine. It was fantastic. Yeah. I wish that the trailers hadn't spoiled it was a horror movie. I want to know what that experience would have been to suddenly see a vampire.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
50 minutes in.
Yeah. It takes a hard left turn. Yeah. I'll recommend a movie from the 80s for people that like that kind of experience. The great Jonathan Demme made a film called Something Wild with Jeff Daniels and Melanie Griffith,
right?
Which is a movie that seems to pivot its genre every 20 minutes. But in a completely organic, natural, like unforced way. And I know people love Sinners. I thought it was okay. I didn't like it as much as I think most people like it. And part of it was sort of what you were saying, which is that it felt to me like that pivot felt a little unearned, is not the right word, but forced, I guess. It was just like, oh, like we're making this like really wonderful movie about these two brothers in this era, in this place that's so interesting, but it's 2025 and you can't do just that. So you have to make it a horror movie.
Yeah.
Right. Like so going back to what I was saying at the beginning, like, why does every movie have to be a superhero movie or a horror movie? Like, can't we have other things? Right. And apparently like maybe we can't, like even our wonderful like period dramas from great filmmakers like Ryan Coogler have to also be vampire movies. Like the vampire aspect of that movie was the least interesting part of it to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it became very tropey, in a way that the first half of the film wasn't. The first half of the film was unpredictable. Yeah,
it became way more predictable. The second half was way more predictable than the first half, yeah.
Well, here's another example from the 1980s where horror... So we talked about Evil Dead a few moments ago, but a horror turned to comedy with far less success. Gremlins.
Yeah.
Wow. So Joe Dante gives us a wonderful movie written by Chris Columbus, a very young Chris Columbus at the time, in 1984. Fantastic movie, $165 million. It's definitely dark. It's scary. It has some funny elements, certainly. More in line what you're talking about, that sort of we're allowed to bond with the characters, because we're tense and at the same time these characters are.
Yeah.
Joe Dante does not want to make a sequel, but he gets the studio to agree that he can do whatever he wants.
Yep.
And boy, did he show them that they shouldn't have done that, because he makes what he regards as a satire or parody of the first movie. And it only earns $41 million at the box office. It leans hard into comedy and is meta in a way that I don't know. I don't. I'm
like okay with it in small doses. It would have been better as a short, which makes no sense because you can't make a short film sequel to a big blockbuster movie. But I feel like it just goes on. It's sort of like you watch the first 15 minutes and you're like, okay, I get it. And then there's like another 90 minutes to go. But yeah, it's exactly what you said. It's because the first film was so successful. He kind of got a quasi blank check to creatively to make what he wanted to with the second one. And he's like, what I love is antic, manic Warner Brothers cartoon style humor. I mean, that's there in all of his movies, right? But that's the movie where it's like really unfiltered and and unleashed.
He sort of pokes fun at even the concept of sequels, which I think is, brilliantly, if you haven't seen it, brilliantly, all you need to see is the Key and Peele sketch about what gremlins get, which particular types of gremlins are allowed are in the movie. Have you seen that sketch?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
The concept of the Key and Peele, the comedy sketch show that ended several years ago now. It's the writer's room. They're trying to write a sequel, and they bring in this guy who is kind of like I think the way they have him made out to be, it's Jordan Peele plays the character. He looks like Hollywood from the Mannequin film, the way he's sort of decked out, and similar sort of flamboyant character. He's brought there to help them. He's like a script doctor, and he just tells them, brainstorm whatever gremlin you want to see in this movie. What could you imagine? And someone's like, how about a spider gremlin?
Oh wait, I think I have seen this, and he's like all for it.
Yes.
Everything they say, he's like, that's the greatest idea I've ever heard. Yeah,
each one's wackier than the last, and then finally at the end, there's a title screen that says all of these gremlins are in the film. Now, interestingly, we've got a Gremlins 3 coming. Supposedly, it's been years in the works. We had an update earlier this year from Chris Columbus, who's once again involved in the film. He said there is a script. They're waiting for Mr. Spielberg, who's Amblin Entertainment had produced the first couple of films, to okay it. Look, we switched from horror to comedy, and now it's light on the horror. Can we switch back? I don't know that there's ever been an example of switching back, but I think that's the way to rescue this franchise.
I'm sure they can, just because I think Gremlins 2 is semi-lost to time. And when people think of Gremlins, they're probably thinking of the first movie. Like, I don't know how much staying power the second one had. So they can probably shift back. I should say the other thing I wanted to say about Sinners, it's sort of interesting. And because I was thinking about Something Wild in this context too. What I think is great about Something Wild that doesn't work in Sinners is that a really good filmmaker can use genre mashing, like pivoting a genre in the middle of a movie in a way that keeps you on your toes and makes the film feel really unpredictable and kind of unsteady in a way that is nerve-wracking. And that can be good when it's like a thriller like Something Wild or a horror movie like Sinners. And I feel it's interesting hearing you say like, I thought the second half of Sinners was really predictable, because I feel like that's the opposite effect of probably what they were hoping that pivot would do, right? Like the idea is like, if you thought this movie was not a vampire movie and all of a sudden it's a vampire movie, then anything can happen in this movie. Yeah. Maybe 20 minutes from now, it'll be a comedy. Like you just don't know. And so you're really like, you're attentive to the movie, in an era where we're all like on our phones while we're watching stuff. Demanding your audience's attention, full attention, is really a challenge. And that's one way to do it, is to really like make it sort of unpredictable and unsteady. Like using the 80s as an example, American Werewolf in London is a movie that I think did it in a way that Sinners couldn't quite pull it off. Like that's a great horror movie, but it's also a great comedy. But it's the way it sprinkles its comedy in and layers its comedy in is very unpredictable, and it just keeps you really like uneasy in a way that's really good. Like it's a very engaging mashing of two genres, I think. Yeah. And probably one of the earlier ones, like probably one of the earlier like horror comedies of that era anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I looked into that recently, but yes, you're right. Certainly one of the most successful. I think we may have had some little bit of examples earlier, but you're right. And the Sinners thing, I wonder if it would have, to your point, if it would have seemed less predictable had we not had the trailer that already planted, that we knew.
Yeah.
We were sold it was a horror movie. I didn't even expect an hour of a period piece, which is literally what you get. I mean, this is not
it's a bummer. I used to edit trailers back a long time ago in the late 90s for Sony. And if you didn't include everything, you would get it back. That would be the notes. I remember cutting a trailer once and it had a kind of a twist ending, and I didn't include it because I was like, well, surely they don't want the twist ending in the freaking trailer. And they were like, where's the ending? And I was like, really? Okay. They're once they've sold the ticket, their job is done. And so they're going to use every tool they can. And if one of those tools is a really cool ending, or the fact that the second half of your movie is full of vampire visual effects, then they're going to use it, unless there's a filmmaker powerful enough to, like a Steven Spielberg or somebody, who can dictate what goes into their trailer. But I don't know how many of those are. I don't even know if Spielberg can do that. Marketing departments are way more powerful than most creative people in that industry. So,
and speaking of trailers that ruined movies for me, here's another example from the 1980s of a shift. So we had Terminator in 1984. Again, another, I think you'd say it's a slasher film. Instead of a Jason or a Michael Myers, we've got Terminator trying to hunt down Sarah Connor. And much like Michael Myers just keeps popping up everywhere. It's a little less like that in the sense that, we've often joked on my show about, we'd love to see, we had that film actually, I don't remember what it's called, where what is Michael Myers doing in between appearing behind bushes, but we get to see that in the Terminator, which makes it a little bit different. But come Terminator 2, once again, James Cameron, tweaks a film franchise to being just straight up horror, really, sci-fi horror, to being a sci-fi action adventure. The horror element's really gone, and it could be any movie about someone. There's different ways different types of films where we have some antagonist hunting down the protagonist, between horror and I'm trying to think something, maybe more like a thriller. And he does this to great success, $78 million for the first film, which was kind of a sleeper hit until I think it probably hit home video and cable like many films in the 1980s. But Terminator 2 is $515 million. Of course, I said this is the trailer that ruined it for me, because they explain how the T-1000 could be back after being killed off at the end of the first film, because now he's the good guy. And this is just a side note, since you also edit trailers. You could tell Cameron didn't intend that to be in the trailer, because the way that they introduce both of those characters, up until that hallway in the store, the mall, whatever it is, we still think that Arnold Schwarzenegger is the bad guy.
It's played like it's a twist.
So that frustrated me so much. I stopped watching trailers after that. Honestly, I would cover my ears and eyes from then on years if I knew I wanted to see a film. La.
I do the same. If it's a movie I know that I want to see, then I'll avoid anything, before I see it. Yeah, I'll do the same thing.
I wonder if this is almost exactly like the Aliens sort of, transition, in the sense that, and maybe it's no coincidence that it's Cameron. He kept enough of the connective tissue. He advanced the characters. He has another female lead who goes from being, a damsel in distress of sorts, although Ripley really wasn't that in the first Alien, but she's less empowered than she's in the second one. But much like that, Sarah Connor in Terminator 2 is a badass now. She's been training. She's been waiting for this, since 1984 for this to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe those kinds of way of continuing it in a way and keeping enough of the old stuff allowed these to be successful in a way that some of these other ones weren't.
I mean, a lot of these filmmakers benefit from having restrictions earlier in their career, right? Usually budgetary restrictions.
Right.
I don't imagine, because he never made anything that small again, I don't imagine that James Cameron, had he had unlimited resources, would have made the Terminator, the first one, the way that he made it. So the fact that he only had $6 million to make this movie that has like a post-apocalyptic war between humans and machines is, forces him to be creative in ways that he wouldn't have to be later, right? This is my criticism of, this is the problem with filmmakers like Michael Bay, or I would argue later period Cameron, where they have essentially blank checks, like unlimited resources. And so they don't have to be as creative as they had to be once upon a time. I think I love T2. It's a phenomenal action movie, but the first Terminator is, to me, clearly like the way better movie. It's just full of atmosphere. It's got all these sort of like film noir overtones to it. We did an episode of our show on a genre mash that we called tech noir. I mean, we didn't call it that. That's what it's called, but it's movies like that combine film noir and science fiction. So stuff like Blade Runner would be the most prominent example of that. And it's one of our favorite, Lisa's and my favorite genres. We just love watching movies like that. And Terminator is like probably second only to Blade Runner as like the best movie from that decade in that genre mash.
It's interesting also that Cameron wouldn't remember his roots in that sense, that he's given his budget, not think to cut back, because he's one of those Roger Corman school guys, right?
He is. Yeah.
There was a film that came out not too long ago that was a bomb. I can't remember what it was. It was a bomb at the box office, and I thought it was so fantastic, but the problem was the budget, and that's why it didn't succeed. And I thought the same thing, like you're saying. Studios, if they want to save money or be able to make, worried about finances, which of course they are all the time. Just everybody's budget's $100 million, whatever, that's it. You could ask for more if you want. You're not getting it. I'm sorry. You got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And start like that on day one, in pre-production or whatever the amount is, but some small amount that allows these folks to make money so we can keep getting good and they get better films too.
Yeah. I mean, if I was president of Hollywood, which is a position that obviously doesn't exist, but if I were, it would be no more $200 million movies. It would be like 20 $10 million movies. Like I want to see and because that's the budget level that inspires people to take risks and make more human, interesting stories. So, I mean, we partially have the 80s to blame to that. For as much as I love that decade's cinema, I mean, that was really, it started with Jaws and Star Wars at the end of the 70s, but it was the 80s where the pursuit of the blockbuster and the tested IP became standard practice. Which is a bummer. But it also gave us, a lot of great movies, as evidenced by the top of this podcast, where we talked about all the ones that are being remade. Yeah. I've got one final example. I don't know if in this order this makes sense, except to say this is another example of what you're talking about, but to success, where this person had more money to make movies that were bigger, and then were sort of I guess they got out of hand after that. Is Rambo. Rambo First Blood, it came out in 1982, for me is kind of more like a 70s movie. Mm-hmm. It's more of a thriller. It's psychological. It's not an action film. Of course, there is action. It made $47 million. And of course, it was popular, successful, so much so that they gave Sylvester Stallone had a brand in Hollywood and could get films made. But he made Rambo First Blood Part 2, which, holy cow. If there was not a First Blood, you would not. I mean, the movies seem unrelated. These characters almost seem, just different people altogether. Now we're in the era of steroids, where everyone's got to be lean and muscular, and masculine. There's more gunfights, per second in this film than in the entire Rambo First Blood. But to great success. We've got an action film now. Instead of this sort of, one that's examining more the emotional state of a soldier, we have a soldier that's returning back to the war that damaged him psychologically in the first place. Yeah. And making $150 million and, a few sequels after that. I mean, the first movie it's based on a book, and it's an anti-war movie in some ways. It's part of a string of movies from that era that sought to grapple with the aftermath of Vietnam and how returning veterans were being treated, and all of that kind of like social commentary gets, essentially jettisoned for the sequels, where Rambo kind of turns into a cartoon character, to the point where, if you might remember this, that they actually made a cartoon out of Rambo. There was a cartoon, which is the idea that like a children's cartoon came out of if you sat down and watched the original First Blood, if you'd never heard of it, didn't know anything about it, and you showed it to somebody, and then you went, and they made a children's cartoon out of this, you'd be like, what are you talking about? So yeah, it's definitely it was an evolving genre experiment, that property, for sure. Right. The last movie was almost a horror movie. Did you see it? Yeah, it was. He goes down into Mexico, and he's like, and it just becomes like it's Home Alone, isn't it? Any slasher. Yeah, essentially, it's like it's like a really graphically violent version of Home Alone. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was even by Rambo 3. I don't remember the subtitle for that. They were stepping up the amount of literally the bullets and blood that you were seeing in these films.
Yeah.
They were just ridiculous. This is a counterexample, I think, though, to this notion that I was sort of alluding to with the Cameron films, that we lost some of that connective tissue, some of the things that made it successful. We didn't see an arc that made sense for the main character, but maybe culturally where we were at as a country, where we're moving towards this machismo, throughout the 80s. And, really by the end of the 80s, everybody was an action hero. We had action hero that, I don't know, the audiences went for that ride because so much of our culture was already pushing us in that direction. Including the notion that a lot of our pop culture was reflecting this notion that was ushered in by Reagan, where you don't want help from the government. You alone are a one-man army of sorts.
There was that's part of postmodernism too, right? The mixing of high and low culture and the idea of taking what is considered low culture seriously. That it doesn't have to be the ballet or opera to be an artistic endeavor worth examining seriously. Stuff like Rambo, there have been books written about Rambo, which is a wild thing when you think about it, when you look at how sort of dumb those the sequels are. The first one's a great movie, and I enjoy the second one. It gets a little dicey after that, but they're all dumb after the first one. And the fact that you and I are sitting here talking about them, 30 years later is kind of hilarious in a way, but that's a result of that sort of postmodern, endorsement of genre mashing that you had.
Yeah, I was going to say, and thank goodness, right? It's basically giving you your living.
Yeah. Happy to do it. I'm happy to teach all of these 18 to 21-year-olds about all of these properties they've never heard of. And have them tell me that, they're not that interesting.
Yeah, I know, right? So what a bummer. Look, I guess I was hoping to extrapolate from all of this, some sort of metric, some sort of formula to decide whether or not, my suggestion that maybe some of the properties that we love, try this today. I didn't accomplish that. And it wasn't for lack of your expertise in this area, which is, evidenced by our discussion here. But I think I'm encouraged. It's not going to happen, but I think I would be encouraged or have confidence or faith in that under the care of the proper artist, director, screenwriter, that maybe we could see that instead of just making another property from our youths into a comedy. Maybe there's a different genre to be explored that could lead to better success than some of the examples we talked about today. So
your argument is you're looking to move away from genre Wait, it seems like I'm conflating two things. Is it the exploitation of existing IP from our youth that's bothering you? Or is it the fact that they're taking those properties and exposing them to genres that are not sort of fluid with what their original intent was?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of the second thing, this idea that let's just make a parody out of things that were, in hindsight, are comedic now. Obviously, there's properties that we look at today that we think, this is ridiculous. How could we? But at the time, they were earnest. So to lean on that to just try to, make a buck, that bothers me a little bit. But the other thing is something you said about early on about how we're just continue to revisit these wells. I love the original Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice was a fine sequel. It was on par enough for me. But if we're getting a third one, I've had enough of Beetlejuice. You give me a Beetlejuice, all right, let's explore let's explore it in a different way. I guess that's the best example I could think of. I know we're getting another Goonies. We're going to expect, high adventure. But I bet you what they're going to do is have these adults have kids, and they're just going to have those kids do the same thing their parents did, 40 years ago. Maybe the adults are the ones that go on an adventure. We see these middle-aged people do something similar. Okay, so in that sense, we get both, but we're moving it on in a way that's more interesting to me than just retreading entirely. Yeah,
I'll tell you a funny story real quick. The one of my closest creative partners is a guy named Fred Decker, who made a movie in the 80s called The Monster Squad.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Which was one of the primary inspirations quoted by the Duffer Brothers for the creation of Stranger Things. It's one of their Uber texts. And after Stranger Things became a massive hit, Fred and Shane Black, who he wrote that movie with, were called into Michael Bay's, I think it was Michael Bay's company. Hopefully Fred doesn't mind me telling this story. I think it's out there on the internet. I think you can find it. They were called in and they were told, we're interested in rebooting the Monster Squad and we want you to make it like Stranger Things. And Fred was like, so wait a minute. You want me to take my property, which was the basis for Stranger Things, and remake it aping the thing that copied my original thing? It was a little like the universe folding.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier. Yeah,
it's crazy.
And again, motivated by money.
Yep.
What they imagined would be safe.
Obviously, it didn't get made, which proves that they didn't have an idea worth, that not Fred and Shane, but the studio obviously didn't have an idea that merited, further exploration of the property. So
right. There's something to it because, they were ahead of their time in that sense that film was what Universal was trying to do with the dark universe, obviously in a much lighter way. But I am such a fan of those old movies, those Universal those monsters, that and Monster Squad had to play with the IP to make it like, although I guess a Wolfman is a Wolfman. And we know he has nards, but there were other things they had to tweak. But having all those folks together in one film is fantastic. There's something there, but what integrity, that they had to be able to even question Michael Bay. He's getting to make another Transformers apparently too, by the way, but yeah. Boy. All right. Hey, Dustin, I could talk to you all day about nerdy stuff. But instead we're going to hang up. We're going to, like we would say in the old days. And I'm going to encourage folks to learn even more about film, than we talked about today with Dustin and his co-host Lisa on The Long Rewind. It's one of our favorite podcasts, and you can find it, like I said, anywhere. And to learn more about Dustin, you can go to his website, Dustin Morrow. There's a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. Thanks for your time today, Dustin.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun.